Hey everybody, welcome to the very first episode of this video game venture. My name is Drew.
And I'm Will.
We want to thank everybody for sitting down and joining us today as we sit back and talk about some of our favorite video games and how we all got involved in gaming. Will, it's a pleasure having you on board. We've been discussing this for quite some time, haven't we?
Likewise, absolutely. I'm happy to be here, and we're ready to talk about some stuff.
Well, before we dive into our background, I think we need to just kind of let the listener know what we're drinking right now, because in addition to video games, we're both big fans of the carbonated beverage known as beer, wouldn't you say?
Hugely, in a major way.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just jump right into it, man. What are you drinking today?
So this is actually a beer that Vinci, one of our good friends, left at my house. It's by Clown Shoes Beer. I've actually never heard of the brewery, but I'll always try something new. And it's from 2018, a Lemon Drop Space Cake Double IPA. Actually says this product does not contain lemons, which I thought was kind of funny.
Is there a lemon flavor at all?
No, I'm a little disappointed by that, but it would be potentially weird if there was, so I'm okay with it. And so far, taste-wise, it's kind of like a standard IPA. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to maybe some people, but for me it does. It's kind of reminding me of maybe like a New England Sea Hag. Comes in a black can, very good beer. Mm-hmm. Just kind of like that flavorful, kind of floral aroma, and it's got a good bite to it. So I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I haven't really had an opportunity to try Clown Shoes out before, but I've seen a number of their beers on the market, and they always have these just really weird names, very strange artwork on their cans. I mean, it certainly catches the eye. They definitely have something unique going on with their presentation at the very least, but I can't really speak for the beer. I've never had their beer.
Yeah, in some ways, after like I don't know, maybe my 8th sip at this point, it's becoming smoother, kind of gradually, which I think is kind of neat, because a lot of IPAs don't do that. They kind of, withhold like a strong presence. And I think that now maybe my palate is just getting used to it. But you're absolutely right. The illustrations on here are actually kind of hysterical and ridiculous. But a lot of times I think you and I and a lot of people buy off of label and not so much, where it's from and what it exactly is.
Yeah, it's difficult to really have a beer that stands out, I think, in the sea of craft brews right now, because there's so many different types of IPAs that are available. You go into any shop that sells, a decent amount of beer, and once you walk past the Bud Lights and the Miller Lights, it's just all microbrews. And it's amazing to see. It's really great, but it's also very easy for a product to get lost in that sea of microbrews. Very, very difficult to stand out and very difficult to find something, other than it's either by word of mouth, somebody like you saying, hey, you got to try this, or, you're buying off artwork and a name.
Yeah. And I think the most challenging part and where it gets kind of funny is like you tell a friend like, hey, like try this Lemon Drop Space Cake Double IPA by Clown Shoes. Like you got to write it down, man. Like you got to like whip out your phone and make a note of it, because there's no way you're remembering half of these IPAs. Yeah.
That's a tough one to remember. I don't think if you asked me tomorrow what you were drinking, I would not remember that name.
Oh, forget about it.
Yeah. No, I personally, unfortunately, have made the switch to coffee for this recording. I was feeling pretty tired, but this afternoon I was partaking in a lovely Hefeweizen by Two Rhodes Brewery out of Stratford, Connecticut. I'm a big fan of their No Limits Hefeweizen. It's a nice light beer. It's kind of perfect, I think, for late summer, early fall. So I've had this can in the fridge for a little while.
Sure.
But it is a good beer no matter what time of year it is. It's got a nice wheat flavor to it, a little bit of lemon in there. I enjoy it. It's a nice relaxing sipping beer,
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Two Roads. I've still yet to kind of dabble with a lot of their beers. I know I've had some on tap before at, just random restaurants, but I keep hearing the names. So I feel like I need to get into it.
Yeah, they're definitely good for IPAs. Two Roads has, off the top of my head, at least 4 IPAs that they offer, and they're always adding new ones and rotating different things in. They're very much a seasonal brand. just like Sam Adams and a lot of the other microbreweries are too. I guess.
Sure.
Well, I guess Sam Adams really isn't a microbrewery anymore. They've kind of become the big dog, so to speak.
Yeah, I feel like they've always been kind of like the original sort of like crafty IPA-ish beer that hit the scene obviously years ago, but it's exploded now into something where people will just buy Oktoberfest like as a staple in October. They've got the winter lager. They got a really good lineup, and a lot of times they'll sneak something into like the Big E that you've just never seen before.
That's the brand that I buy when I don't know what to buy.
Exactly. It's a fallback.
Mm-hmm. So,
and it never really fails.
No, it really doesn't. They're consistently good.
Very.
Let's move on to the gaming aspect of things, though, because our podcast is primarily about video games. First of all, I want to ask you what you're playing right now, Will.
Sure. So I kind of jumped on the bandwagon of Red Dead Redemption 2, and I've been struggling to play it, consistently and really do a deep dive. But I'm excited to do that on Tuesday when I'm not working. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely the kind of game, as most of you probably know, that you can't just pick up and play for 10, 15 minutes. You really do have to take the plunge and really sink your teeth into a game like that, because as you said, Drew, it's a very vast game, and it's intimidating for people like you and me who are just, old dudes that are kind of weekend warriors at this point.
That's a good way to put it. Weekend warrior, most of my gaming is done on the weekend lately, or very, very late at night. I'll try to sneak in an hour before I fall asleep on the sofa. Mm-hmm. And a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 just, man, that is just so daunting. And I know my history with those types of games, and I know that I would just absolutely struggle to follow the story, let alone beat it, last time I played a game like that, well, I am playing Horizon Zero Dawn still. And
nice.
that game came out, last year? Over a year ago? And I still haven't finished it. And I'll pick it up and I'll play it for about an hour here, an hour there. And I'll go, a number of days in a row playing that game. But it is just such an open world. It's vast. It's gigantic. And there's so much to do. And the end is nowhere near. I don't know. Like, there's a percentage that shows up if I go in the options, and it's like, oh yeah, you're 50% beat. And I look back at it and I'm like, all right, well, I probably put 40 hours into this. Why did I do this to myself?
Exactly. And I think that a lot of those games they're so good and they're so visually good, but they're so intimidating for somebody who, I hate to kind of say it this way, but when you have a full life, when you're married and you have a job and you're going to school and all this stuff, it's very difficult to, partake in those games and do that kind of, deep dive that you were able to do when you were younger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was an excellent article that you shared with me through Kotaku where they kind of talk about that. And I think they made some really good points. This is coming from a perspective of somebody who writes for the site, and they have a family. I believe they mentioned they had children too, no?
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Which, fortunately, that's not necessarily an issue in my case, or yours, I suppose. But I mean, anybody, like, I've always admired parents. Like, I had a friend who had two young children that were, I want to say like 7 and 5 or 5 and 3, something like really, really young.
Sure.
And this woman was able to beat game after game after game after game. And I'm like, how the hell do you do it? I don't have kids. I can't even do that.
It's astonishing.
It really was. And what it boiled down to was, like, when the kids went to bed, that was video game time. Mm-hmm. And it was every single night for an hour, maybe 2 hours. Then they would go to bed and they would get up and they'd work the normal 9 to 5, come home, take care of the kids, everything, but they always made sure there was time for themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's what you learn is it's really about making time. And we've all heard it time and time again, but you and I talked recently that sometimes in today's world, we spend so much time on our phones, on social media, and just kind of reading about games and watching other people play games versus actually playing them yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that if guys like us who often probably do waste some time when we could be using it to utilize actual game time. We could probably get some of these games actually beat the same year they come out.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm guilty of going on YouTube and watching reviews or watching playthroughs of the games, just trying to figure out what the games are about without knowing necessarily for myself. And meanwhile, I really could be finding out on my own. Like that 20-minute video that I watched on, Horizon or whatever. That's 20 minutes I could have spent playing, but sometimes it's easier for me to watch 20 minutes before I head out the door than it is to actually fire up the system and getting, wrapped up in it.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like a disease. You and I we've been there when you see a game come out or about a game that's been out for a while and you see it go on sale, you buy it, you play it for 20 minutes to maybe an hour, and you're like, okay, like this game is really vast. I'm going to get back to this at a later time. And either you do or you don't. And that's really what starts that vicious cycle of creating this immense backlog that a lot of us.
I have shelves and shelves and shelves of quote unquote backlog.
Oh yeah.
I've walked into Goodwill a number of times and I see a game on the shelf for $2.50 and I'll be like, you know what? I'll play that someday.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like some could call it a never ending nightmare. And in some ways it is. In a lot of ways it is. But at the same time, you have this knowledge of knowing that you own the game and you can play it whenever you want and you'll get around to it when you're in the mood. And I think that's what keeps gamers coming back and puts them in that cycle.
Totally.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I am to a degree too, but I do wish I had more time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think you kind of touched base on something that I want to dive into. And really it's the main reason that we decided we wanted to do this podcast. You and I have had a lot of very unique video game experiences over the years, and that's something that we wanted to share with an audience, and we wanted to share it with friends who, our goals are to have people on the show as guests as well and get other people to talk about it, because eventually everybody's going to be bored of hearing my voice. So let's start. Like, how did you become a gamer?
Oh gosh, I mean, I suppose it's kind of a generic story, but my first memory was, just being a kid and going to my neighbor's house. I remember his name was John, and he had a Nintendo, original Nintendo NES, and he had the classic Super Mario Brothers / Duck Hunt cartridge, and that was, I believe, upon memory, the first game that I ever played. Okay. And I just remember being addicted to both games, and we used to kind of just sit there and play as kids, and that was my introduction. And slowly but surely I moved on to SNES, the Super Nintendo, and I remember that was back in the day when Toys R Us was still in existence. And I remember that asking my mom to bring me there, and I really needed a system for myself at that point. And she got me the Super Nintendo that I remember being behind the sort of plexiglass case, and you had to take, a little slip for, what you wanted, and you had to bring it to the, the cash rep or whatever, and kind of just present it, and they would get it for you. Right. And that was my first system that I ever owned, and I just kind of collected from there, and got all the most popular games.
So when you bought the Super Nintendo, did it come with a game, or did you pick a game out?
Great question. No, it definitely did come with a game. It was the Killer Instinct Black Cartridge Bundle. And I believe, if my memory serves me correct, it was $99, which my mom was very content with. Because, video games were expensive back then, and they were expensive for most parents. And it's still a very expensive hobby. But needless to say, that was the package I got. And I started with that game. And I remember playing as one of the characters, Cinder, and just kind of, getting really into it. And I'm surprised that my parents didn't notice how violent the game was at the time. But I just don't think that they really cared or noticed, for that matter. But yeah, that's how I started. And the other half of it was going to, local arcades as a kid, your timeouts.
So when you were growing up, how many arcades did you have nearby?
From memory, I believe there was a timeout in the Milford Mall, the Milford Mall, and then there was another one in the Danbury Fair Mall.
Okay.
And both of those malls I would frequently, visit. And, it was the whole game of, how much money do I have? How much money can I waste in exchange for tokens? And hopefully I don't get, bodied by, the guys that work there, because that was kind of what happened to me.
Right. Did you have any experiences at Milford Amusements, or Milford Rec, as we used to call it?
I certainly did. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I have a lot of memories of not only just gaming, but, pool and all of the other aspects of that place. But I definitely remember doing what was called I believe it was called a lockout, where they actually lock out the whole place and you kind of get trapped inside. And if you leave, you can't get back in.
Yeah.
And I believe it started at midnight, if I remember correctly.
I never participated in one of those, but yeah, they I'm pretty sure they started at midnight, and basically you had to run of the place for the whole night, right?
Yeah, we certainly did. And you could do anything from, playing the arcades, skee ball, Qzar, also known as laser tag. And it was basically just a bunch of bloodshot-eyed, zit-faced teenagers running around with, Coca-Cola classics and, horrible snacks and, greasy arcade cabinets. And that was just kind of what the camaraderie and the atmosphere was like back then.
Yeah, yeah. The only downside to that place is I remember unfortunately, some of the machines weren't taken in the best of, they weren't taken care of to the best of their ability. Like there were a lot of games where the joysticks didn't work properly, or the monitors were messed up, and I don't know.
That was the other aspect of it. Is like you had to go into these places, whether it was the rec or timeout, and sometimes you'd really want to play a game, and you would see that paper sign, with a piece of Scotch tape that said out of order.
Yeah.
Or, this side isn't working. It was a major bummer, because it's not like, the internet was huge back then where you could like Google something, or, you would ask the timeout employee, like, what's going on with this? And they would just be like, hey, it's broken. Come back another time.
Right. So, I mean, if you were lucky, there was a sign that was posted that told you it was out of order.
Exactly.
I can't tell you how many times I went to play Street Fighter 3 and the damn thing just didn't work.
And sometimes you lose a token too, and good luck getting it back.
Absolutely. So after the Super Nintendo, did you jump into the PlayStation at that point, or the Nintendo 64, or?
Definitely the 64. I believe it was 1996, 1997, somewhere around there. I believe that's when it came out, and that was the next system I got. And I believe the first game I had was like Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, or it might have been Zelda, Ocarina of Time. It was one of those games. And I definitely remember, I still feel ashamed to kind of admit this, but I remember my parents, especially my mom, she would buy the game or games that I would want for Christmas, and she would hide them in her closet. And there's a lot of times that I kind of just figured out where she was hiding them, and I would secretly open them like surgically. And I would sneak out the cartridge and I would play early, and then I would like put it back like perfectly.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And to this day, I still feel like a terrible son. But, that's just what you do when you're a kid. Did
she ever find out?
I don't think so. And if she did, I don't think that she would ever have the courage to say, hey, I know what you did. It's 20 years later. We're going to talk about this now. Where did you get the box cutter? Where did you get the razor and this stuff in such a surgical manner? But, again, the excitement was really on another level back then, especially when you're younger.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely remember being super excited about some of those Christmas gifts my parents would give me. I never went to those lengths, but
yeah, don't take after me, kids. If anybody's listening, don't do that.
Well, my the last video game system that my parents bought me was the PlayStation 1. And then I remember my mom bought it for me, and she gave it to me on Christmas Day, and there was a game that was included with it. And she said, all right, from here on out, you're on your own. You want a game, you got to buy it. so I think it was like 13 or so at the time. And, it came with Battle Arena Toshinden, which wasn't exactly the best game. And she did help me buy another game afterwards. I remember we went to the store after Christmas, and she did help me pick out something. I ended up getting Twisted Metal 2.
Nice.
and then from that point forward, I was essentially on my own. But she would surprise me on Christmas once in a while. I remember getting Metal Gear Solid for Christmas, and
what a game!
Oh man, it was a tremendous game. That was when I played that. There was really nothing like it.
Nothing.
I remember very vividly, getting up to Psycho Mantis, and I had the DualShock controller, and oh man,
no one's ever going to forget what you had to do during that scene. And I don't really want to talk about it because there are plenty of people that still have yet to play that game. As old as it is, there's very significant things that happen in that game that are very magical, and I would hate to have to ruin that for somebody. But yeah, amazing game. I actually remember. You probably remember that store, Babbage's.
Yeah.
And I remember going there all the time at the Danbury Fair Mall, and it was kind of like my visit before going to timeout. And I would go there and I would look at the TV that they had. It was just like a 13-inch CRT tube TV they would just have on the counter. Yeah. Game trailers. And I remember watching, just an amazement and awe of like what this game was. And it was Metal Gear Solid. And it was just these trailers of this, incredible looking game. And at the time, polygon mess that it was, it just looked incredible. There was just nothing else like it at the time.
Yeah. And it wasn't just, I think, the game itself and the visuals of it, but just how engrossing everything was.
Very.
They really did a great job of building that world and pulling you into it, I think, in a way that a lot of games to this day do not accomplish that.
Precisely. I mean, it's exactly why it's a staple and a classic, even to this day.
Well, to backtrack a little bit, just to kind of circle back to where we started here, my gaming experience, I think, was quite a bit different than most people's. For me, I did not grow up with a Nintendo in the house. We started with an Atari 2600, which belonged to my parents. And then one day my father came home with a TurboGrafx 16 that he had bought from somebody who he worked with. And apparently, basically, he sold it to my father because his kid wanted a Nintendo and his father bought the wrong thing. One of those kind of things like, Dad, you bought me the wrong system. I don't want this one. So he sold it to my dad for a song, and I didn't have the balls to say to him, I don't want this. I'd rather have a Nintendo, because I knew that, my father worked hard, and even at a young age, I realized that we didn't have a lot of money, so I was going to take what we can get. And this was automatically an upgrade from the 2600. And it came with 2 games, Keith Courage and Alpha Zones, and Bloody Wolf.
Oh, gosh.
And Bloody Wolf to this day is still one of my all-time favorite games. I just love that game. I love that game like some people love Contra.
Now, is Bloody Wolf sort of like a Primal Rage Killer Instinct game? Am I drawing the right picture here?
No. It's more of a isometric army dude shooter, I guess.
Okay.
It's excuse me. I don't want to compare it to Contra because it's not Contra, but it's more in that universe. Does that make sense? Like it's basically the president is kidnapped at the start of the game, and you play one of 2 different guys who sets out through level after level to try and save the president. And there are plot twists. There's actually a story involved in this thing. It's a little bit deeper than it seems on the surface, and there's some really cool stuff in this game. It's all kind of it's this weird practical kind of shooter. Like you get like actual weapons like shotguns and bazookas. You have a knife and things like that, and then you get to ride a motorcycle. but it's still a video game, so like the motorcycle can jump. Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's good to have that aspect in games, because like I think a lot of games of today just aren't as fun as what they were back then.
Well, I think that's a product of the visuals. When you're working with pixels and a limited color palette and a limited sound palette, you have to be creative.
Yes.
And I mean, we could do an entire episode of video game music.
Sure.
And I'm sure we will at some point, but just to kind of touch base on where my brain is at right now. think about some of the most famous video game songs you've ever heard. Whether it's Mario or Sonic or Street Fighter or Killer Instinct, even had some pretty awesome music for the time.
Mm-hmm.
Doom. I'm leaving a ton out. Tetris. I could go on and on. And those are all done on like MIDI tracks. It's all chip tunes and things like that. And they had limited sounds and limited palettes essentially to work with, and they had to come up with something that was melodic and memorable.
Right.
Now fast forward it into, I would say, really it started probably around the time of the PlayStation, when things started getting a little bit more cinematic in the games.
Yes.
The music, I feel, took a hit because now you can use orchestras. Now you can use CD quality audio, and as great as that is, it's also a curse.
Yes. I mean, implementing that into the disc in the game, I'm sure is definitely a process.
Right. So, one of the cool things about the Turbo Graphics was they had the very first CD attachment. So the Turbo CD was, pretty awesome thing. I never had the opportunity to buy one, unfortunately, but if you go back and you listen to some of those soundtracks, like you got a lot of like Japanese hair metal going on, blazing guitars and crazy guitar solos and stuff like that, and it sounds awesome. And when you're playing Gates of Thunder and you're like just got this screeching guitar solo on it, I mean, like this is the baddest thing on earth.
Yeah, there's definitely a charm to that.
Yeah, but then like you turn around and nowadays it's just all just orchestrated and. There's very few
real orchestras.
Yeah, but it's just not memorable.
It's not always. No, it certainly isn't. Sometimes it takes a game like, Journey, which I think that we all know about at this point. And there's a reason for that, because that game was primarily, I think, successful because of the music and how it was implemented with each scene in that game.
Right.
Which is what made it so powerful. We'll definitely have to talk about that game at some point.
Yeah, that's something I've never played, so I'd love to sit down and learn more about it.
Absolutely.
So, well, what else do you want to talk about here? I mean, what other memories come to mind? I mean, we had a game day. What was it, last weekend?
Yeah, it was either last Sunday or the Sunday before. I mean, time flies when you're when you're busy, but yeah. It's an interesting way that kind of just got started. I mean, it really started from one of our friends, Damien, who's very big into emulation and just kind of old school games in general. And he was helping me basically get into that realm of emulation and how I can play some of these old school Capcom fighters, which is really something that I wanted to kind of delve back into. Since I was so terrible at them in the arcades, I thought, you know what, let me talk to him. I'll emulate the games, I'll reinstall Windows, and I'll figure out how to play these games properly now that I'm 33 and I can do it from home and not have to be at the mercy of like a timeout employee who can just come over like little token on the cabinet and say, I've got you next. But yeah, that's how it started. I got frustrated with the emulation installation side of things, and
Let's dive into that a little bit. So you were trying to do this. You were trying to emulate the arcade version of XMen versus Street Fighter, right?
Yes. That was a game. Kind of going back on memory. It was a game that I played a lot in the arcades, and I remember, just kind of being good / terrible. Like I was good if no one was playing with me, but I was terrible if one of the timeout employees came over, and it was mainly always the employees that would come over and just destroy me. And it's because these guys work there, so they have enough time to play before they open or play during the day if they're kind of doing whatever. Right. But long story short, that was the game that kind of just piqued my interest into emulation. It's a very difficult game to acquire. Right. In 2018, let alone any year, really after like 97, 98, because of the release. The release was so specific. It was released in Japan. I don't believe it was ever released in North America except on PlayStation. Right. It was just always one of those kind of games that was so good but so difficult to buy.
Right. So to kind of backfill the for anybody who may not be familiar, XMen versus Street Fighter is a fighting game with a tag system. right? And you pick two characters, and it's very similar to Marvel vs. Capcom, but this is like one of the predecessors. They released it on the Sega Saturn, but only in Japan. And the version that they released on the Saturn was arcade perfect or damn close to it. But you had to import it to get that on your system, and there was a process that you had to go through to get it to work. They did not release it on any other systems except for the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, and that version does not allow you to tag in and out. You can only play as one character. Your secondary character, who you do get to choose, is just to kind of like come in and just break up the action, so to speak. He'll like come in and throw a fireball or something. He's basically a helper character. Yeah,
it was, from what I understand, just a terrible, port overall, and it was missing tag team, which was a major feature in the game.
Yeah,
and it was just bad. Even some of the animations, from what I've heard, were completely cut out, dumbed down, and it just didn't run well. So, it was that. I had an emulation software that was called MAME. I believe it was MAME.
Yep, that's the arcade one.
Yeah, and I couldn't get the game to load. Just some kind of issue going on. I was speaking to Damien about it, and we were going back and forth. And I just made kind of a brash decision to kind of just throw that away and say, you know what? I'm frustrated. I'm kidding on Amazon. I'm going to buy the Sega Saturn. I'm going to buy the game. I don't care how much it costs as long as it's nothing outlandish. And I'll just play it, the original way, the OG way.
Right.
And that's how it started. And then one thing led to another, and I just got very carried away on Amazon. And
so that really snowballed because when you first told me that you were buying XMen versus Street Fighter and you were buying a Saturn, I'm like, okay, that's completely reasonable.
Yeah, and you can digest that.
And then you started telling me about all the other things.
Yeah. It got completely out of control. And I just, I think what happened is I was sitting there on the couch and I had ordered it. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I can create some camaraderie out of this. Maybe I can find a way to turn this into something more. So you bought the Saturn. You bought a copy of X-Men vs. Street Fighter. And then you bought some fight sticks, right? For the Saturn? Many.
And then you bought a Dreamcast. Right? Is that
snowball
next?
Starts increasing, yes.
So you got the Dreamcast, you got Marvel vs. Capcom, you got Marvel vs. Capcom 2. What else did you pick up for that?
Oh gosh, it was a laundry list, honestly. It was let's see, Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter for the Saturn. I got let's see, you covered the ones for Dreamcast. I got X-Men versus Street Fighter with the cartridge. That was in amazing condition.
Yeah.
And I want to say that was essentially it. I feel like I might be missing something, but
and then you bought two fight sticks for the Dreamcast, which you were lucky enough to get the official ones, the official fight sticks, and they were in great shape.
Yes, very good shape. I got those off of eBay.
And then what else? You bought fight sticks for the PlayStation 4.
Yeah, I got a couple Hori Rap 4s, just to kind of, cut down on the actual.
Right.
Yeah, the Hori Rap 4s, and those work on old gen, so that would be PS3 and Xbox 360, and then they work on current gen as well.
Oh, so those do work on the Xbox as well. I thought it was just strictly PlayStation.
Yeah, as far as I know, I believe it is both. But I do stand corrected if it is PlayStation. But I know that it's old gen and gen, and I got them for the sole purpose of modding. I've always wanted to get into the realm of modding sticks because I've always appreciated what people can actually do with the illustrations on the stick itself, and then just kind of modding the buttons.
Yeah. I remember you mentioning that you were getting I think you got Sanwa sticks, right? And you also got the Sumetsu buttons.
I ended up going with the Sanwa buttons, and I just went with some different colors, and I didn't really like the way the Hori sticks looked, as just kind of base models. So it gave me the opportunity to kind of start slow and start small with, modification. And then, as time goes on, I definitely want to start dabbling with doing custom illustrations underneath. I think that would be very cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like really cool stuff you could do with those sticks. There's a whole community just for modding them.
100%.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So we were waiting, getting all these updates on the tracking as everything was coming in, and one by one we'd get a photograph of something, or we get a message saying that something isn't working quite right, and you had a bit of a scare with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, right?
I did. It was a very oh my gosh, I guess amateur would be the right word to kind of describe what happened here, because as a gamer, from the early sort of teenage, even before that years to now, to think that I couldn't even clean the disc or think about cleaning the disc first before, kind of making this emergency run to this local retro game shop. Mm-hmm. It turned out that there was basically a thumbprint on the middle part of the disc that a lot of people forget is a very important part of the disc. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it, several times, and I was like, this disc is perfect. There's a reason why I paid what I paid. To kind of, get a disc like this, there's no reason why it shouldn't load. And it turned out when I got to the retro game shop, the guy cleaned it with his fucking t-shirt. And he's like, well, there's a thumbprint on the center. Let's see if this works. And, it ended up working. And it was funny because before he did that, he tested out a game that had an enormous amount of scratches and thumbprints all over it, and it worked just fine. So, I think the Dreamcast, potentially is just one of those kind of finicky systems where the slightest little thing can set something off.
It is the Dreamcast is very fussy. It's a very, very finicky system, and it is temperamental, so do your best to keep those discs as clean as possible.
Yeah, point taken, but that was a learning lesson, and I'm just glad it worked. Yeah, everything else that I ordered, from the sticks to the games to the systems to the HDMI adapters and everything else that kind of comes with it. It was quite a journey and a fun one at that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that also brings up a whole nother set of things too, because you had some challenges of getting this equipment looking good on an LCD TV. We weren't playing on CRTs here. We had a pretty nice flat screen, 55 inch.
55.
And you want to make the colors and you want to make the games themselves look as good as possible without introducing any lag. So that was a bit of a challenge, and I think you did a pretty good job of handling it with the HDMI cables that you found.
Yeah, it was interesting because I really didn't do any kind of all on a whim and all very kind of sporadic and impulsive, with what I did. And with the HDMI cables, I just kind of, typed it in on Amazon and did zero research. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of, had to cross my fingers that these things were going to work. Right. And I didn't realize until talking with you that there's a whole community just for that as well. Yeah. And, they worked, and we discovered that there was some weird artifacts going on with a couple games on the Dreamcast. Mm-hmm. And, that's still something that I have to kind of, research and iron out.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't entirely sure what was happening at first, but we found out, and it was most notable, I think, in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, mm-hmm. Where we were getting some strange artifacting on some of the projectiles and things of that nature, mm-hmm. Where it would kind of not quite pixelate, but you could see the box around the animation as it was moving through space, and it was very, very strange. And I think what was happening was essentially for the Dreamcast, it takes the VGA signal and it converts it to HDMI. Mm-hmm. It's not doing any upscaling or anything like that. It's just straight one-to-one signal. So if it's a game that I guess is not so nice with the VGA signal, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps.
It does something to it. But strangely enough, though, that particular game does say it's VGA compatible, so maybe it's just a wire. I don't know.
Could be the wire, could be the TV. It's one of those things where I think, the both of us can agree that it's just one of those complex things that you really have to kind of, experiment around with. And, I think it takes a keen eye and somebody who's kind of familiar with how these sprites are supposed to look, to kind of, understand like what's actually happening. Because I think to your average gamer that's like, oh, I remember playing this back in the day, and then they go ahead and pick it up, they're probably not going to notice that.
Well, we didn't notice it at first. We were on like our third or fourth match.
You're right.
And then, it caught my eye. I'm like, what's going on around that fireball? And then we started looking at it, and once one of us noticed it, everybody noticed it. It was over.
And then you can't stop looking at it either.
Then you can't unsee it, basically.
But yeah, it was a learning lesson, I think, for potentially all of us, especially me, that there is definitely a community and a science behind upgrading these games. And I took a look into that very interesting link that you gave me, Drew. It was that very expensive, converter thing.
FrameMeister.
Yes, which I think that we should touch up on, kind of quickly here. A very interesting item. I definitely want it. I watched the YouTube video, and for people listening, it's a very simple looking, unit or device that, allows you to kind of plug in these retro systems, and it does its best job to convert them in a very special way to, something that's more HD.
Yeah, it's an upscaler, but it also does it in a way that doesn't introduce lag, which I think is very important. A lot of people don't realize that when you plug a retro console into your TV might have the inputs for the RCA jacks, the red, yellow, and white jack, or they might have component input. But a lot of times those are going to introduce lag to the gameplay. And when you're playing a game with such extreme precision as a fighting game, that can make or break it. So there's devices like the FrameMaster, there's the OSSC, which I can't remember what it stands for at this moment. And then there's the RetroTink, which is another one that's kind of newish to the market. And I think there might be one or two others that their goal is to take an older system and connect it to a new TV. And they all do this in their own special way, but they're giving the best picture possible with the least amount of lag. And each one of those three devices is different. They're not the same. They all do something differently, but they all have their pros and cons. And I think with the FrameMeister, it's well considered to be the best one, but it's also most expensive.
Yeah, and like I said, a couple times now, it's definitely something I had no idea about. Yeah, kind of gave me that link. I didn't realize that there was such a community and such a sort of yearning to kind of find out how do you play these games in the best way possible. And I think it's way more than just buying like a random cable off Amazon.
And, as somebody that's like, I have a CRT in my home. I have a 26-inch Samsung, and it's a widescreen CRT. They just when LCD TVs were just starting to become popular, the Samsung did this line of high definition TVs, widescreen, but analog. And it was this kind of flash in the pan thing, very hard to find. I could get up to 1080i on it, right? 720p 1080i. So the picture was always pretty good. And when I bought my Xbox, when I bought my 360, when I bought my PS3, everything was going into that thing on component, and it was great. But I've moved. Let's see here. So I've had that TV. I bought it when I was living at home, and I've moved 4 times since then, right? I moved out of my home into my first apartment. I've lived at 3 apartments, and then I just bought a house this year. So that TV has moved with me 4 times, and I swear to you, it gets heavier and heavier each time. Not only that, but the picture quality on the TV has been getting fuzzier and fuzzier. And I have a soft spot in my heart for that television, but it is taking up an immense amount of space, and it doesn't look that great. And I'm pretty much ready to move on from it. I purchased the RetroTink. Unfortunately, they were back ordered. I'm waiting for it before I pull the trigger and actually get rid of this TV. But I'm pretty sure that the CRT is going to be gone before the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just the nature of having something for that long and that particular build. It's just such a thing of the past, and that's the danger of venturing into what I got into, is that I don't know how long these systems are going to last. But I'm going to definitely take care of them and hope that they last, enough to do quite a few game days.
Well, the good thing is that there is a thriving community outside of just retro gamers, where they're enthusiasts. People that mod these systems, that will take a system, repair it, or make it so that it does RGB output or HDMI output. I have a PC Engine Duo that needs to be repaired, and I had sent it out. Unfortunately, the repair fell through, but I can send it out and get it not only repaired so it works, but also mod it so that there's no region block on it, and also mod it so that it outputs component.
Sure.
And this is a system that had just standard RCA wires. Putting component on it, oh my goodness.
Oh gosh.
And that's going to be a huge increase in the quality right there.
Sure. I mean, component.
You're paying somebody hundreds of dollars for their time and for their parts.
That's true.
And
that's true.
When you're spending almost as much as a console or even more, it's a little tough to work with.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like I want to send out like a disclaimer or some kind of warning for anybody that tunes into this and wants to kind of take this avenue that I took. If you're not impulsive like I am, don't just make sure you do your research, because it's an expensive hobby, it's an expensive avenue. And there's a lot that goes into it, and be prepared to, buy more things after you've bought everything that you thought you needed. And I think that that's something that comes with, going down this road to kind of retro gaming the OG way.
Right. I mean, even like we that day we had a spur of the moment trip to gaming store to buy another controller because the joystick wasn't meeting our expectations.
Yeah, it wasn't cutting it, and that's exactly one of the aspects of this, is that you buy everything you think you need. Sometimes there's you got to take that emergency trip to go and get something else, and it was a fun trip. It was worth it, and we got something that was third party, which is kind of against our personal rules, because we're very like first party enthusiasts, I think, all of us. And we made a decision, it worked out well, and we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it ended up getting something that I think was good. It got Damien's thumb of approval, so I think that says it all. Yeah, that says it all. All right, so let's move on to our final topic of the evening, which is the PlayStation Classic, and I think this is a great thing to talk about. They announced about 6 or 7 days ago, I think, the full lineup of 20 games. Now, the PlayStation Classic was originally announced when, September, I want to say?
I believe so.
It was like right around Labor Day or so, or maybe just thereafter, and they announced that there were only 5 games at the time that they were willing to talk about. Now they've since gone through and put out the full list of 20. So, we're beyond Final Fantasy VII, Jumping Flash, Ridge Racer Type 4, Tekken 3, and Wild Arms at this point. Now, first of all, before we jump into the list, have you pre-ordered one?
I have not, and it's definitely something that I think I'm probably going to do. I'm not a big pre-order guy like I used to be, because unless there's some kind of incentive, I just don't really see the point. And that just kind of goes back to like the SNES and the NES classics that, came out, the mini versions. Like, they were hard to find if you didn't pre-order, but like now you can walk into Best Buy and pretty much get either one at the drop of the hat. So I think with this, I probably will pre-order it. If for some reason I don't, I'm sure I'll be able to find one.
Yeah, I ended up pre-ordering it the day I saw it because I'm a consumer whore.
Likewise, my friend.
I didn't want to go through the hassle. I was lucky enough to get an SNES Classic when that launched, but I had to wait for the second release to get an NES Classic. And I did, but it took me a while. So this one, they announced it, and I jumped on it right away. I'm looking at it, and I'm seeing myself, all right, Wild Arms, that's a pretty big game. And if I'm not mistaken, Jumping Flash actually is pretty pricey. So I'm going to go over to my favorite video game price site, pricecharting.com. We are not affiliated. And let's see here. Jumping Flash is currently going for complete in-box $34.76. Yeah, if you have the long box version, it's $45. I remember that being more expensive for some reason, but
the long box you said?
Yeah. So if you have a long box, remember how PlayStation games originally came in like the larger boxes?
I do.
Yep. So that game, Jumping Flash, was, if I'm not mistaken, a launch title for the system, and it was originally released as a long box game. And I suppose they must have reissued it later on, either as a greatest hits or a regular size box. I'm not entirely sure. There were not a lot of games that were long box that were reissued as regular boxes.
Gosh, I don't think I ever even owned a game that was, but I definitely remember.
I have two of them. I have a copy of Descent and a copy of Kalik, the DNA Imperative. Neither of which is particularly great. Descent is good, considering for the time, they were emulating a PC game, basically.
Sure.
But the crazy thing is despite that they're both in long boxes, the boxes are completely different. One of them is like a hard, like a CD case kind of thing, and the other one is like a completely plastic shell. It's very weird. I'll have to show you one of these days.
Cool.
But Wild Arms is a $30 game. I thought that was more too. Maybe the price dropped since the announcement. But anyway, full list of games. We got Battle Arena Toshinden, Cool Borders 2, Destruction Derby, Final Fantasy VII, Grand Theft Auto, Intelligent Cube, Jumping Flash, Metal Gear Solid, Mr. Driller, Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, Rayman, Resident Evil Director's Cut, Revelations, Persona, Ridge Racer Type 4, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, Siphon Filter, Tekken 3, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, Twisted Metal, Wild Arms.
It's quite a list.
Yeah.
And I think, the consensus now, I read some things on Twitter and the internet, but it just seems like it's kind of half-half. Some people are okay with it and they're going to get it regardless. And then there's the other half that are really kind of taking a giant shit on this list. And I think it's just because, you have that particular gamer that's very selective and very particular about what they want from games and what they want from developers. And there's definitely, a couple sides here. And I think that with what we have, there's a good amount of games on there that still make it a worthy purchase in my.
Here's the thing, man. With any of these collections, you're never going to be able to please everybody.
Nope.
And I think with if you look back at the NES and the Super Nintendo classics, there's a lot of the same kind of stuff going on. Mm-hmm. Especially with the NES Classic, and I believe rightfully so with that one. I think there are some games that they probably should have included that they didn't. But as somebody who never grew up with an NES, I was just happy to have my hands on those particular games in the first place.
Sure.
The SNES Classic, I think, was a little bit tougher because I think they did a good job of picking games, and they did a really good job of picking games that are of high quality. There wasn't any filler on the SNES Classic, so you're at a point now where you're swapping out one A title for another. There wasn't anything on that particular system that was subpar, in my opinion. And then I'm looking at this list, and I feel the same way about it. Even though there's a lot of games on here I haven't played, I'm familiar with them, and they all check off different boxes in the genres of video games,
Indeed.
I think they did a great job of picking different representatives of a number of different genres and putting together a really solid lineup.
I think so. And, I think that, you're dealing with, like I said, a couple different kinds of gamers here. And you're going to have people that are going to really nitpick this list. And then you're going to have people that are going to look at it in a positive way and say, you know what, there are some games on here like Cool Borders 2, Final Fantasy VII, Grand Theft Auto, like real staples and real memorable games. And then they're going to look at stuff like Mr. Driller and Intelligent Cube and might be like, what is this or why is this on here? Right. But at the same time, they're going to look at it in a positive manner and say, you know what? It gives me a chance to play something that either A, I never played, or B, there's probably a reason why it's on.
Well, Intelligent Cube is widely considered to be one of the best puzzle games on the system. And that is a game that has really had some pretty high prices. If you were to buy that brand new, or not brand new, but if you were to buy that, complete in box, you're spending anywhere from $30 to $70 depending on the seller.
Wow.
And it's a great game. I remember playing the demo for it, and I always wanted to check out the full version. I just never got around to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a very good game, and I'm really looking forward to firing that up at an affordable price.
Yeah, and I think that's really the catch here. If you can look at this in a positive way, you've got a great list of games. It's a great price. It's a miniature console.
Right.
It's cool, and if you can't really see it that way, then, it's kind of on you, and right. I think it's hard to kind of be selective and picky here. And if you want to be that way, I agree with, one of our favorite Instagram pages, Retro and Rare. He has a podcast, and he talked about this on his latest episode. And he said, if you want different games, then either buy them on the PSN store or buy the physical copies, or mod the system, because there's a lot of people that are modding these mini systems. And I don't know anything about it, but if you really want a different lineup, that's kind of what you got to do. You got to take it or leave it, and that's kind of it.
Right. And I mean, I haven't personally done any modding on my NES or SNES Classics, but my understanding is it's very easy to do. But I mean, for $35, you could buy you can buy a Raspberry Pi, and a couple more bucks to get a decent case on it, an SD card, and it's very easy to build a system that is capable of handling most PlayStation 1 games. So if you're okay with going down the emulation route, you can absolutely make your own PlayStation Classic, put more than 20 games on it, and be just fine. But I think the whole thing is it's not just having, for me, it's not just having the games in this nice, I love my RetroPie. And yeah, it's got 700 Nintendo games on it, and a whole bunch of PlayStation and Atari games and TurboGrafx games. But it's not the same as holding the official controller on the official system. And I think that these classic systems do a great job of making the best of that situation, try to give you back that feeling.
Yes, I mean, like, people just need to, I think, realize that, even when you take the miniature SNES, the fact that these controllers don't look any different from the original ones is such a huge thing. And
I put them side by side; they're identical.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's, to me, and to somebody who grew up with this stuff, that's incredible. It's incredible that they can either reproduce this stuff, or they've got leftovers in the back room that they're just doling out. I mean, either way, I think that it's remarkable, and it's such a cool thing that they're doing. And I think it's a shame that all of these miniature systems are getting somewhat of a bad rap from some people, because there's too much selectiveness going on.
Now, I do have a concern with the PlayStation Classic. The game system does not come with a DualShock controller. It comes with the regular standard PlayStation 1 controllers.
I did not know that.
That is a problem with games like Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now. Did I play that with the analog sticks, or did I use the D-pad?
I don't know if the analog sticks are necessarily required for it, but the rumble certainly is.
Right. That's right. The original controller did not have the rumble feature.
Yeah. I'm trying to see if there's anything online about it.
Yeah, for people that didn't really grow up with PlayStation, the rumble was very well executed, where it actually had these kind of weights inside of the controller itself, and they spun. Right. And, I think that's actually just a really cool thing. I have no idea how it works, but they worked well, and you could really get very different types of feedback depending on the game and what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking through real quick, and I'm not seeing anybody posting about that. Let's see here. PlayStation Classic, plus controller.
I thought I heard, too, that there was no power break or something like that for it. I don't know if that's if I heard that correctly, but I know Retro and Rare on his podcast, he was talking about something to do with no power brick.
From what I saw, essentially the game system is powered by micro USB, very much like most cell phones are. So I believe they're including the micro USB wire. I don't believe they're including the brick that wire would plug into.
I see.
And they're going under the assumption that people just have dozens and dozens of them lying around.
Right.
And most people probably do. I know I do, but not everybody does. So.
Not everybody, no. And you're going to have those people that are going to walk into a Best Buy one day and be like, oh, cool. Like, it's a miniature PlayStation. Let me just pick this up real quick. And maybe they're missing something, or maybe they don't have that cable or something like that. The
good news is most TVs have a USB port in them nowadays.
That is true.
So as long as the TV is producing power, the system should be able to run off of it. I know my NES Classic and Super Nintendo Classic will run off of my television's USB power.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how the Sega Saturn HDMI cable is working that I picked up. It's kind of an obscure setup where you have to kind of plug it into that. And then it's like, you basically have to power the cable, which is very strange. But, a lot of these cables just kind of work in that way.
Right. So it's not going to be ideal, I think, for most people. But, there's inexpensive ways around it. And, If you need a brick, let me know. I have a bunch of them. So, well, we've been chatting about an hour. Do you have anything else that you want to touch base on? Anything else you want to talk about? Anything I might have missed?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that we talk about and I really enjoyed discussing this list, and I think that what we have here is definitely promising, and everything that we've talked about so far is definitely a good episode.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you enjoyed it too. Feel free to let us know what you're looking for, what you'd like. As soon as we set up our social media, we'll get that information out to you.
And get a name.
So we're still working on a name, and we've been very vague about it up to this point. So if you have any suggestions for a name, you can also do that. Well, if somebody wants to follow you on Twitter, on Instagram, how can they do so?
Sure. So most of my handles are going to be the same. It's Will _ Gear. And it's kind of a spin on Metal Gear Solid because I'm a huge fan. So feel free to check that out. And like Drew said, once we get some social media stuff up and running for the cast, we're going to have all of that stuff available to everyone.
Right. And if you want to follow me, hit me up on Twitter and on Instagram at PsionStorm. It's PSIONSTORM. That's the best way to reach me. Well, this was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing this again with you. And I'm looking forward to seeing what topics we come up with.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
So thank you for listening to us, folks, and we'll see you next time.